The CCP has been accused of bringing communism into China, but actually it's not. The communist ideology came to China in 1850s, and the first communist state in China was called Heavenly Kingdom of Eternal Peace. The rule of the Qing dynasty over China between 1644 to 1911 was a period of Manchu's assimilation to Chinese culture, while oppression of Han Chinese by the Manchu people. Manchu at the time was as alien to Chinese as Japanese and Koreans. The ethnic tensions between the Manchus and Han people eventually toppled the Qing dynasty in 1911. There were many uprisings of ethnic conflicts in nature, and the biggest uprising was Taiping Rebellion around the time of American Civil War. Taiping means eternal peace. The Taiping Rebellion is often referred to as the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement, due to the fact that Taiping espoused a doctrine which was both nationalist and communist. And the nationalism and the proto-communism value actually out of a Christian teaching. Taiping often referred to the Qing dynasty and the Manchu people in particular as some variants of demons and monsters, representing the Taiping's proclamation that they were fighting a holy war to rid the world of demons and establish paradise on earth. The Taiping Rebellion was commanded by Xiuquan, a self-proclaimed brother of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Taiping Rebellion's goal was religious, nationalist, and political in nature. Xiuquan sought the conversion of Chinese people to the Taiping's version of Christianity, to overthrow the ruling of Qing dynasty and a state transformation. Rather than supplanting the ruling class, Taiping Rebellion sought to upend the moral and social order of China. Xiuquan preached an early form of communism in 1847 that stressed a sharing property. In Taiping's occupied territories, the landowners were often executed. Taiping's rebellion's ideology mixed with religious ideas and laws based on the 10 Commandments of the Bible. Xiuquan's followers were primarily destitute laborers whose lives was deeply affected by the first foreign invasion of China by Britain from the West, the First Opium War between 1839 to 1842. Hong's followers were mainly a subset of the Han people called Hakka Han, which means migrants. These migrants were refugees from Mongolian invasion of China in the 13th century. The migrants spoke a provincial dialect different from Chinese or Cantonese. This migrant dialect is still spoken in Taiwan and coastal China today. Xiuquan's promise of free land brought in tens of thousands these migrant followers who sought protection from oppression by the Manchus and other Han Chinese. Socially and economically, the Taiping soldiers came from almost exclusively from the lowest class. Very few of Taiping soldiers, even in the leadership caste, came from the imperial bureaucracy. Almost none of Taiping soldiers were ever landowners. In 1847, Hong Xiuquan founded the God-worshipping society, the first Communist Party. Tales of angelic interventions from heaven to save local villagers abounded. Worshippers claimed to visit heaven physically during prayers. In 1850, alleging that Jesus has urged Hong Xiuquan to fight for heaven, Hong Xiuquan began to arm his followers and pretty soon defeat Qing forces in the early battles. 2 years later, Hong Xiuquan and his 2 million follower soldiers, include many women, captured the city of Nanjing and named it as the capital of heaven. He established the heavenly kingdom as an oppositional state and gained control of a significant part of southern China, eventually expanding to command a population base of nearly 30 million people. The Heavenly Kingdom announced social reforms, including strict separation of the sexes, abolition of foot binding, land socialization, and suppression of private trade. In religion, the kingdom tried to replace Confucianism, Buddhism, and Chinese folk religion with the Taiping's version of Christianity, God worshipping, which held the Hong Xiuquan was the younger brother of Jesus. In its version of Cultural Revolution, the libraries of Buddhist monasteries were destroyed, almost completely in the area of Yangtze Delta. Temples of Taoism, Confucianism, and other traditional Chinese beliefs were often defaced. Like I said, it was Taiping's version of Cultural Revolution, similar to the one started by Mao Zedong 100 years later. In 1856, Britain and France launched the Second Opium War against China and continued until 1861. Hong Xiuquan initially believed Western government would sympathize with his Christian holy war, so he tried to make overtures to them. But the European forces eventually helped the Qing government in seizing back what the Taiping rebellion has conquered in 1864. During this civil war, the Manchu army, as well as the Taiping soldiers, carried out numerous massacres of civilians on each side. And it is estimated that this particular civil war, have claimed between 20 million to 70 million lives, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. The Taiping Rebellion inspired Sun Zhongshan, the founding father of New China, and other future revolutionaries who have later successfully overthrown the Qing dynasty and founded the Republic of China in 1911. That later moved to Taiwan after another long and bloody civil war. Some surviving Taiping veterans even joined the Chinese Communist Party, which categorized the Taiping Rebellion as a proto-communist uprising. Nearly 100 years later, after Xiuquan proclaimed founding of Heavenly Kingdom of Eternal Peace in Nanjing, Mao Zedong proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic China in Beijing in 1949. The new China is the reincarnation of the Heavenly Kingdom of Eternal Peace. So you can, if you're looking at the history of the communist the China since 1949, including Cultural Revolution, land reform, you will find the similarities between these two movements, the Taiping Rebellion and the communist reform. So the Chinese people had desire since the middle of 1800 for a political system that emphasized shared wealth and equality. Through the Taiping Rebellion in the 1850s and the Red Army since 1927, with actually as only with the Chinese people's support that the Red Army led by Mao Zedong successfully defeat the Chinese Republicans, which the Kuomintang, and then drove them out to the Taiwan island. Actually, I watched a documentary of the Long March of the Red Army. During the Civil War between the Communists and the Chinese Republican, the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek launched 5 attacks to the base of Red Army, and eventually drove the Red Army had to retreat from their base in southwest China. And they had nowhere to go but marched 10,000 miles northward to northwest part of China. Actually, there's one part during this long march, the Red Army almost shared the same fate as the Taiping rebellions about 60 years ago. When the Red Army tried to retreat westward into the mountains and the Changjiang gorges, they were actually stuck by the river called Dadu. That's almost the same place in 60 years ago. The last army of Taiping rebellion was basically wiped out by the Manchus. At the time, the raging river blocked the retreat of the army. There was no boat. Nobody can help the Taiping army to cross the raging river called Nujiang Anger River, which is, I saw that documentary. You can hear the roaring sound of river flowing in the background. So in the 1930s, the Chinese Red Army faced the same fate. Only by God's grace, they finally found all the boat was confiscated by the Chiang Kai-shek's army, except one boat. Someone would try to save for themselves to cross the river, and the Communist Red Army found that boat and was convinced one local boatman to carry them across the river. But there were actually, I think, 20,000 soldiers was going to need to cross the Anger River, and that boat was not enough. So I think it was the first time was only 17 soldiers was on that boat to cross this river. Again, again facing the onslaught of machine guns from across the river from the Chiang Kai-shek. But they went through, but that was 17 out of 20,000 army. So another group actually another group of Red Army was requested to, I think, travel westward within, I think, 2 days of, I think, maybe 200 miles on foot. And then really by God's grace, this a group of Chinese soldiers was able to got to that bridge maybe only a couple hours before the Chiang Kai-shek's army. And at that time, the bridge, there was a bridge because the boat was not enough to let 20,000 troops to cross the river. They had to go to the called the 大渡飞夺泸定桥. They have to go to the bridge called the 泸定桥. And there's actually 2 movies in China. One is called 大渡河, crossing the Anger River, Roaring River, and then the other one is how to catch that bridge, the bridge called 泸定桥. And that time, all the wood plank over the bridge was already being removed. There's only 13 iron chains link that's still staying there, has not been removed. And then about 100 Chinese Red Army soldiers was able to be there to get to that bridge ahead of the Chiang Kai-shek's army by a couple hours. And then, so they start crossing the bridge. Well, actually no bridge anymore. It was just 13 chains across this river, and to defeat the Chiang Kai-shek's army on the other side with the help of the 17 soldiers that was on the boat initially. So for there's a group of 100-some soldiers that rushed to that bridge on foot with almost no shoes for 2 days, for I think 200 miles, walking to it, running 2 days. It's amazing. And only because of that victory, the Red Army was saved, and the 20,000 troops was able to cross the bridge before the Chiang Kai-shek and eventually arrive northwest China before the Japanese war finally officially broke out. So comparing these two historical events, I think it was, to me, as a Christian, I feel it's God's grace, and it's divine intervention that the Communist Red Army was able to survive and then build this new China with the communist ideology, just like the heavenly kingdom of eternal peace. And I think finally the Chinese people have its own political system, which is give them the heavenly kingdom of eternal peace.